Hi everybody, welcome back to the Gallery Throw Crochet Along. I'm Brenda KB Anderson, and today we're going to be working on lesson number 3. So if you're new to this Crochet Along, you may not know we've already worked through 2 different squares already. The bobble cable square was the first one, which looks like, let me pull out my sample here. Looks like this, except there's white edging all the way around, but we talked about that in lesson number 1, and also in lesson number 1, we talk a little bit about the kind of overall overview of the whole throw so that you kind of understand how that works. And then the next lesson that we did was lesson number 2, in which we worked on the log cabin square, which is this one right here. So at the end of this session, I will be answering any questions you guys might have about previous squares, or of course, you know, as we go along, if you guys have any questions about the one that I'm working on, definitely put those questions in the comments and I will get those answered for you. Also, I did see that there were a couple of questions that people had added about previous squares, so I'm going to go over those as well afterwards. I saw those in the chat box. They popped up since the last lesson that we had. Okay, so this time we're going to be doing the grain square. So that looks like this square right here. I named it the grain square because it kind of looks like the top of a piece of wheat or something with all these little, they're kind of like weird elongated something between a spike stitch and a puff stitch, okay? And the cool thing about this stitch pattern is, ta-da, it's reversible. Isn't that cool? So it looks the same on the back. Most of the stitch patterns in this blanket are not fully reversible. They do look decent on the back. You know, it doesn't look bad on the back side or anything like that. But this one is actually totally reversible. So this is a stitch pattern that I had come up with quite a while ago, maybe a few years ago even. I found something similar to it in a stitch dictionary, and then I modified it, and then it kind of became its own thing. Maybe there's something like this out there already. I haven't come across it, but that's why I just named it the grain square. It's not really an official stitch or anything, but you know what? Once you make something up and you name it, I feel like it's official. But this is a stitch that I really love. It has really pretty texture, and I love that it's reversible. But I have not really used it on any projects so far because I design a lot for magazines and yarn companies and that sort of thing, and I felt like this really needed to have a video attached to it to be able to show how this works, because describing it in words and even the stitch diagram, it's clear enough, but there are some little pointers I want to give you because even though it's not hard to do, there's a couple of little sneaky spots that you could very easily misinterpret. So we're going to go over that. It is just a 2-row repeat though, so it's nothing complicated. So don't be scared off by that little introduction that I gave it there. But all right, so let's get started. And like I said before, if you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat because I'll be looking at that just to see if I need to go over anything again or explain anything further. If you guys have anything that you'd like to share, like, have you guys started working on any of the previous squares? I would love to know that. I did see one of our friends, Lori, has posted some pictures on the gallery, on the website, in the project gallery, rather. I saw her photos and they look awesome. They're like these really bright jewel tone colors, and then instead of, I used off-white for my, this kind of background color, and she is using black, and it looked really cool. So I love seeing what you guys are working on, so please post your pictures. I get a really big kick out of seeing how everybody interprets things and makes it their own. That's really fun for me, so please, you know, post some pictures. All right, so we're going to start by working on the square. I also want to mention, I know I kind of said this before, but I did, in lesson number 1, I did go over kind of the general overview of this blanket, how it's put together, you know, your materials and all that. If you're looking for the specific materials list and the general instructions, that is in the lesson 1 download. So you'll find that there. In the lesson 3 download, which you can go ahead and download and follow along here, we don't have any of that extra information in this, but I will tell you that I am just using a worsted weight acrylic yarn, and I am using an H which is a 5mm hook in this sample. But of course, you know, you'll use whatever hook you need to in order to get a fabric that you like. Also, the gauge information is also in that first download, that lesson number 1 download. So if you're looking for that, that's there. But having said that, you know, this stitch pattern is just a cool one just to learn, even if you're not interested in making the whole throw. You know, I wanted to choose some stitches that maybe some of them are a little bit more unusual, really highly textured, kind of interesting stitches that people may not have seen before, so that you guys can just learn along and have some new stitches under your belt, like this one. So, all right, so we're gonna start by chaining 24. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. All right, and then we are going to begin with the second chain from the hook and work into the bottom of the chain. So the bottom of the chain is the side opposite these V's. So normally when you're instructed just to work into a chain, normally you'd think of these 2 V's as being where you place your hook under. Some people just put their hook under the back loop. A lot of people do that. Some people place it underneath both loops. I almost always start out my projects by working into that back bump. If you guys have joined me for other lives, you guys know this. I talk about this like most of the time, to roll your chain over. And then check out those little dashes on the back side. That's where I insert my hook. And the reason that I do that is because it leaves 2 loops open for later stitching, and it looks really neat and tidy. It looks just like the top edge of your work. Plus, the main thing for me is it's easier. It's just easier to get your hook underneath that 1 loop. So that's why I almost always do that. All right, so we are going to work single crochets across. We're skipping that first horizontal loop on the back of our chain. So, or I should say the bottom. And then we are going to insert our hook underneath the second, in the second chain. So we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. There's our first single crochet. We're going to continue that all the way across our chain. Okay, so insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Just using a regular single crochet here to begin. Okay. And another thing, if you guys want to let me know where you guys are crocheting from, I love hearing from you guys and knowing where you are and what you're up to, or let me know what kind of projects you guys are working on. Another thing I really love is letting me know what kind of projects you want to work on. If you're interested in certain stitch patterns, or if you're interested in learning a certain kind of technique or a certain kind of project, definitely let me know, because a lot of my ideas come from what you guys want to make. And so, like for example, the log cabin square, that's the square that we did in lesson number 2. Somebody had just placed a little comment in the comment section that said, hey, I'd like to make a log cabin afghan or log cabin squares. Can you teach us how to do that? So I added that into this blanket. So this blanket is kind of a community project, right? Suggestions from other places. All right, so we've worked a single crochet all the way across. It looks like this, and then we are going to chain 1, which does not count as a stitch. Then we're going to turn our work just like you're turning a page in a book. Just flip it this way, and then we are going to single crochet all the way across once again. So we are, because this chain does not count as a stitch, so we are working directly into that very first stitch, which is right here. And if you're newer to crochet, I would highly recommend, especially when you're working back and forth and turn rows, to use a stitch marker at the beginning and at the end of your rows in order to just keep track of those stitches where the first one and the last one is. And it might seem strange because you might think, well, I just made that stitch. I know what it looks like. It's going to be fine. But it really does help. Sometimes when you turn your work, it looks a little bit different because you're looking at the back side of the stitch, and it's easy to get confused. And I find that lots of the time when people are having trouble with the edges being uneven, or like, hey, why is my blanket getting wider and wider or narrower and narrower? It has to do with either missing one of the stitches on the end, or adding accidentally another stitch to each end, or one end or the other. So that's just a really good way to make sure that you're not doing that, by just placing a stitch marker into the first and last stitch. All right, so there is our second row, and then we're going to do 2 more rows of single crochet. Okay, so this is just basically like the section where we set up all that kind of fun spike stitch stuff. So we're just working in plain single crochet for basically just the first 4 rows of this piece. So right now we're doing row number 3 here. Oh, and Kristen Stone is working on hers from sunny Arizona. Awesome. I love Arizona. I've gone camping there a lot, and it's just so beautiful. And Lori got off work early, was sad. I thought I was going to miss the live, headed home to get started. Awesome, Lori. I wonder if this is the same Lori who posted her pictures of her beautiful blanket. That's cool. Well, I'm glad you guys are here. Yeah, and another thing, if you guys are working on this blanket, I like to hear what kind of color combinations people are using. I mean, the best thing is if you guys post pictures and then I can actually see what you guys are doing. But even if, I just like thinking about color, and it's fun that I love that people interpret things and put their own spin on things. And I like to just picture what everyone else is doing, putting their own personality stamp on their own blanket. All right, here I am working on the 4th row of single crochet. Yeah, and if you guys have any ideas so this blanket project, this throw project, will take us through to sometime this fall, I think, is when we finish up our blankets. But then after that, I am open and thinking, right now I'm kind of thinking about what I'm going to be doing after that. So a new kind of project we could all work on together. So if you have thoughts and ideas about that, let me know. All right, so here we have 4 rows of single crochet. Okay, so when you're counting your rows of single crochet, if you're newer to crochet, what I look for is these sort of, it looks like a little crease between, so there's a little indentation here. That comes up every other row. So here's a row, and then there's this sort of horizontal bar of all these little dashes, and then there's another row here, and then there's that crease, and then it starts over again. So here's a row, horizontal bar, and here's a row, okay? Because I know when we stitch back and forth, it can be kind of confusing when you first learn how to crochet. It can be kind of confusing as to how many rows you've done. It's not always obvious. Okay, so we're on row number 5. We are going to chain 1 and turn, and we are going to single crochet into the next stitch. So that's just in this very first stitch. Okay, let's see. Oh, let's see, and I'm sorry if I mangle your name, the Mangusian. You didn't realize you were actually watching this live. It's a sunny day in northern England today. Oh, well, welcome. That sounds lovely. Okay, so we're on row number 5, and we have made 1 single crochet into the very first stitch. Then after that, all the fun, exciting stuff starts, okay? So, and I want to just point this out too. If you are a chart person, I'm just going to flip this over so you can see. I'm a very visual learner, and it really helps me to have charts. Sometimes I will read the directions and look at the chart at the same time to help me wrap my mind around certain things. And this is one of those patterns where it really does help. If you're not a chart person, that's okay. You don't need to be able to read a chart in order to make this pattern. It's all written out. You can completely ignore this if you want to. But if you're newer and you're open to learning about charts, I just want to show you basically how to look at this. It kind of looks like a picture of what we're making, right? So you see 3 columns here and 3 columns of these kind of grain motifs here. So it's sort of a representation of what we are making. It's basically showing you what stitches to make and where to make them. So when we started, we began right here at this little tiny blue arrow, and then we worked a bunch of chain stitches across, and then we worked 4 rows of single crochet. So the single crochet, those are represented by these little tiny plus signs. So we worked 1 this way, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, these little zeros on the side, those are really just the turning chains at the ends of your rows. So now we are working on row number 5, which is right here. We are going to work that first single crochet, and now we're going to be making this kind of crazy long spike stitch sort of thing. So you can see this is not actually going into this stitch directly below. It is going all the way down here to this. Okay, so that's a different place. I will read through the instructions just so you know what goes with that. Okay, so let's see. We're going to be doing a long puff combination, which is totally something I made up. I mean, maybe this exists, I don't know. Well, it exists now, I guess. Okay, so the stitch combination is worked over the next 6 stitches. Okay, so your stitch count is going to remain the same. There's no increasing or decreasing when you make these combinations, okay? But what's happening is you're making your stitch into a different place. It's not the normal placement of your stitch. And then because you're making your stitch into a different location, like down here, you're going to be skipping the corresponding stitch where you normally would have worked right behind your work. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to count 4 stitches to the left, or if you're working as a left-handed crocheter, you're going to count 4 stitches to the right, basically 4 stitches ahead. Okay, so we've worked this stitch right here, and then we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to go 2 rows down. So this would be normally where we put our hook, right there, but if we go down 1 row, it's right there, and if we go down 2 rows, it's right here. So that location is where we are going to be placing this first puff stitch combination. So let's see. In order to do the first leg of the puff stitch, you're going to yarn over, and then you're going to insert your hook into that indicated space. Okay, so you're going to go 4 across and 2 down, which is right here. So really, the 2 down should be about halfway between the top of your work and the bottom. So you kind of go down, if you, let me just see if I can sort of describe this too. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's your normal stitch placement. If you go directly below that little V, there's a space right there, and then you go 1 more bump down. Okay, so that's where we're going to go. We're going to insert our hook into that space, and then we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to pull up a loop. And now, so when we do this, we're going to stretch this loop out so that it comes all the way back over to where we had been crocheting before. It needs to reach over there, because otherwise it's going to start making our square squish in. If we don't pull it all the way up here, and then we do our yarn over pull through, it's going to start making it really bunchy. Okay, so you need to let it be long, pull it all. I kind of angle my crochet hook like this and stretch it out so that it comes all the way over here. And then you're going to repeat that by doing a yarn over, insert back into that same place where we just were, insert, then another yarn over and pull up, stretch it out. Okay, so now you should have, let's see, five loops on your hook. Okay, and then you're going to yarn over, and let this be kind of a longer yarn over. Don't pull it really tight. And then you're going to slide through. I'm actually just pulling up on my hook so that it's up against, kind of stretching this out a little bit. So that way this strand can be long enough. So you're going to pull that through all those stitches to finish that little part of this combination. Okay? So now this is the trickiest part in the whole situation. We are only skipping 1 stitch, and that stitch is right here, the one that we're going to skip. So we're going to work into this stitch, but we have to move all this stuff over to the side. Okay, we're going to move it that way so that we can make our stitches in the correct order. We're not crossing our stitches over or anything. So we're skipping this one, and then we're going to work into this one. And if you have never done this before, or done this kind of thing before, and it's really hard for you to figure out, where this is, then I would put a stitch marker into that stitch, so that way when you pull it through, you'll know which stitch it is. Let's see. Let me see if I brought a stitch marker. Oh, I do have one right here. We'll just try that, so that way you can see what I'm doing a little bit. And this, you don't have to do this every time. You will get used to pulling things over, but I just really want to make sure that I am clear about where you're supposed to be stitching. Okay, so I skipped that stitch, and then the following stitch is where I put that marker. Now we're going to move all this stuff over to the side. So we're just going to kind of grab onto that fabric and feed it through until we see where our stitch marker is. There it is. And now we know exactly where we need to stitch through. I don't know if you guys can see this here. Maybe I'll just push my stitch marker through through the whole thing. Maybe that's not going to work. There it is. Okay, so here it is. That's the stitch we're working into right there. Okay, so we'll put our, oops. Okay. Actually, this would work better if I had smaller stitch markers, or like the kind that were just like a little loop. I don't know if I will be able to do that without, okay, I have an idea. What we're gonna do is we're gonna skip this stitch, then we're gonna pull this stitch all the way through. We're gonna place our stitch marker in that stitch just to check and see if that really is the right stitch. All right, so we're gonna place our stitch marker here, and then you can pull it back through this way and take a peek. Okay, so there's the one we skipped, and there's the next stitch that has the marker in it. You can kind of see. Okay, let's do it that way. It's a little bit easier. Just for that very first couple of stitches, so you can really see and make sure that you're getting your next stitch in the right placement, okay? So we've got that marked, and we're just going to take a little single crochet into that. I'm going to remove it, so my hook is in the same place. Okay, so we're just going to do a single crochet right there. And that's what it looks like. So you've got this slanting, sort of goofy looking puff stitch, spike stitch thing kind of coming over to the side, and then a single crochet right next to it. And then you're going to do 3 more single crochets as they come up. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's a total of 4 single crochets after we did that first leg of the stitch combination. Now we're going to do the same kind of spike puff stitch into the same space, reaching backward into that spot, okay? So we're going to yarn over, and you can see where all these come from. It's right here. We're going to yarn over, insert our hook into that same space, yarn over, and pull up a loop so that it's nice and long, okay? Because this time, before it kind of angled back this way, now it's kind of angling forward, okay? So you just have to let it reach. Then you're going to yarn over, and repeat the same thing, go into that same space, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 loops on the hook, just like that. So we've got some strands going this way, some strands going that way, and the back side looks the same. Okay, so then we are going to skip the stitch that corresponds to this, okay, because every time we make one of these longer stitches, we're skipping 1 stitch in the working row, because we're creating a stitch up here, and we don't want to add any stitches. So we have to skip over one of the stitches in the working row because this is substituting for that, okay? So now when you get to the second leg here, this, you may think, oh, well, we really had to push that over to find that stitch. Because of how asymmetrical stitches are, and I'll explain this a little bit more as I work further along. Stitches are asymmetrical, okay? So most of the stitch is kind of made to the left of the top of the stitch as you're working on this, okay? So what I mean is, when you create a stitch, as we created that stitch, we made the little hat the top of the next stitch already. So when we made that long spike stitch, the bulk of the stitch is actually kind of sitting a little bit further to the left compared to where the top of the stitch is. So we're not going to be skipping over, we've worked already into this stitch, we are skipping this stitch, and then we're going to make a single crochet into this stitch. So what I'm trying to say, although maybe not very well, is that even though we really had to move this over to dig around and find that stitch that we had missed back here, or the next stitch where we were supposed to stitch, this time it's the opposite. You really don't have to mush it very far to the side. You can really just see where you are supposed to add that stitch. I'll explain a little more as we go along. I'll do this a bunch more times so it'll be a little more clear. This is, see, now maybe you can see why I have not used this stitch in a project without a video, because it really, this is maybe making it seem a lot more difficult than it is, but I am trying to be very clear about where exactly you're putting the stitches, and catch any little pitfalls that could happen here. All right, so we've done our puff stitch, and at the end of that combination of puff stitch, you do skip that stitch, which we did. then we worked a single crochet, and now we are going to repeat that whole situation, okay? So we're gonna count 4 stitches to the left, or if you're a left-handed crochet, you're gonna count 4 to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're gonna count 2 down, 1, 2. So that's where we're gonna insert our hook. I'll just keep my hook in there for a second. So we're gonna yarn over, and it looks like it's going very far. It's going way over here, but it works out, I promise. I know it seems crazy. So you're gonna pull that up and make it nice and long. Then you're gonna yarn over, insert into the same place, yarn over and pull up a loop, stretching those out, yarn over, and pull through all 5 loops, okay? I'm just gonna take a little moment to just peek through here. Oh, and Evelyn is saying she's working in Long Island, New York, making 2 afghans at once. Whoa, okay. Can't wait for the next square. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, cool. Thank you, Evelyn. I'm glad that you have joined us and you're making 2 at once. That's a lot. All right, Elaine is saying, oh, that she's excited and she wants to do this. Awesome. And she likes the charts too. Oh, yeah. We got a lot of chart love here. Yes, especially for this project, you really just need that chart because it is very hard to explain and not that hard to do. That's the thing about this kind of crochet. All right, so remember now, we've done our first slanting to the right kind of post puffy stitch thing. So we're gonna have to dig in here and find this stitch. We're skipping that stitch, okay? So the last one we actually worked into was here, then we did that long puff stitch, so we're skipping the corresponding stitch behind that, which is this stitch right here. So we wanna work into this stitch, but we can't just work into it here because then we're gonna be on the wrong side of our puff. So we gotta slide the puff over and make sure we're getting our hook into that stitch, okay? So I'm gonna move it over, kind of pull that stuff through, and make my single crochet. And then I'll just peek back over here and make sure, yep, I caught the correct stitch. So it's really not, you know, all that stuff with the stitch marker, I was just trying to give you a way so that you could absolutely be sure that you're getting in the right spot for the first couple stitches. And then once you get used to how much to push that over to the side, you won't need to keep doing that. It'll be fine. Okay, so we've worked our first single crochet after that leg of the puff, and then we're gonna do 3 more. So we have a total of 4 single crochets, because there's always gonna be 4 single crochets between those puff spike things. Okay, so we've got 4, and now we're going to complete the second part. So we're gonna yarn over, insert into that same space down here, yarn over, pull up a loop, make that nice and long so it stretches, okay? And then we're gonna do that again, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we're gonna yarn over and pull through all 5, okay? And then we're gonna skip the next stitch, which is right here. I mean, you really don't have to pull that out of the way. So we're skipping that stitch, and then we're gonna put a single crochet right there. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And then we're gonna do that one more time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, counting down, 1, 2, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. Do that again. We have a total of 5 loops, yarn over, pull through all 5, push this over to the side. You really kind of do have to kind of pinch and pull that fabric out. And then you're gonna do 4 single crochets, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're gonna do another spiky puff stitch. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through all 5, skip this stitch, and then we're gonna do a single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So that's another way of knowing if you got that first row in the right spot, if you got all your stitches in the right spot, because you should only have 2 stitches left after you skip that last stitch. 2 stitches to add, a single crochet into each of those 2 stitches. So it should all end up even. So I would say definitely take the time to count your stitches before you do this very first row. So that way you know for sure got everything in the right spot. Now from this point on, it gets easier because you already kind of have some things marked with these stitches, and I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. So the next row, we're just gonna do a single crochets all the way across. So we're gonna chain 1 and turn, and then we're gonna single crochet all the way across. So you may see some of these strands are just a little bit longer than others. That is pretty much unavoidable. But what you can do is you can just put your hook in there and just kind of even it out like that, and it makes it look so much better. You just kind of, I know that's an extra fiddly step. But if you care about what the back of it looks like, you know, if you're making a reversible thing, just take a minute and kind of try to even those out. Okay, so we've chained one and turned our work, and we are just going to single crochet into each stitch across as they come. So we have not increased or decreased at all. We should still have 32 stitches across. Wait, is it 32? No, it's 23 stitches. I just reversed my numbers there. Trying to see if you guys were paying attention. Oh my goodness, there's lots of people popping in here. Carol Clark, I'm loving your project. I've made all my first squares and I have 2 more log cabin squares to do, and then I'm ready for the square. Awesome. I'm using pink, lemon yellow, light blue, light green, and gray with white edging, so that's going to be really pretty. Cool. Oh, and she's from Northern Ireland. Awesome. And Calista is just saying it's beautiful and well done. Thank you very much. All right. So here we're almost completing, let's see, this would be row number 6, where we're just doing a single crochet into each stitch all the way across. Okay, and then we're going to chain one and turn. Every time we do those chain one turning chains, they don't count as a stitch, okay, just so you know. So now we are going to do these little, the long puff combinations once again, okay, because that happens on every other row. I think of that as being my right side row, okay, when you make the puff combinations. All right, so we do a single crochet into the first stitch, then we're going to do a long puff into, you can count 4 stitches over and 2 down, and then to double check that, you can see your puff stitches come together right here, and where we are going to be stitching is right above that. So it's like this little hole that's directly above where these two come together. So that makes it easier. You will find that after you do this a couple times, you will just know where to put your hook. So just make sure you're going 2 rows down, insert your hook, and we're going to do that long puff combination here. Like that. Remember to move it over to the side. And we're skipping that 1 stitch, and we're working 4 single crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4. And another way to check and make sure that things are lined up correctly is in between number 2 and 3, when you're working on 2 and 3, that should be about where the bottom of your puff combination is. Or really kind of, it's almost like directly below stitch number 2. You can see it, that's where that should be, okay? Kind of below 2, kind of in between 2 and 3, that's where that point should come down. But if you're finding yourself, you know, maybe if you had not gotten your stitch here, but if this was your first stitch after, then number 2 and 3 would be way over here, and you'd know that it wasn't in the right spot. It's just another way to double check and make sure you're getting that, you're not skipping 2 stitches there, because that is easy to do. Okay, so we're doing the other half of the puff combination, and then we're going to skip 1 stitch and place another single crochet into the next stitch, and then another puff combination. So yarn over. So really you're just doing the puff combination, which takes up 6 stitches, and in between that you're doing a single crochet. Let's see, I think I might be 1. Yep, not quite making it far enough back there. 1, 2, 3, and 4 single crochets. And now we're going to do that long puff combination here again. Pull through all 5, skipping that stitch, and we're going to do a single crochet here. And then we'll do another one. Let's see. Oh, Elaine's saying she might practice doing a washcloth. Yeah, this would make a really cute washcloth. Yeah, and I always recommend to people to do washcloths actually when they're learning a new stitch combination, because then you can use it. It's a finished thing. I'm just one of those people who has a hard time swatching just to swatch, and I know it's good for you to do that. Oops, I can tell right now that I missed a stitch because I didn't pull this back quite far enough because I ran out of stitches. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. So after you do those 4 single crochet, you should have 3 more stitches left here before you do that second half of the puff, the second half of the puff spike combination thing. 1 and 2, because you're skipping 1 stitch and then you're doing a single crochet into the next 2 stitches, just like that. Okay, so that's how it looks, same on both sides. So then you would just continue in this stitch pattern. So on all the wrong side rows, which I mean, there really isn't a wrong side, but we're just calling it a wrong side. All the wrong side rows, you're just single crocheting across, and all the right side rows, you're doing that long puff combination. So you should have those 3 vertical kind of lines of these stitches here. All right, so you'll work back and forth until you get to row 23. Let's see, I think we just did, yeah, rows 7 through 22. You're repeating those two rows that we just learned, 5 and 6 over and over. And then after row 22, you're going to chain 1 and turn. And then for row 23, you're just doing 1 single crochet into each stitch. So the reason that we add that 1 more is just to make it a little taller and to make it look a little bit more even compared to the bottom here. So we're just going to do 1 single crochet into each stitch across. Oh, and I should mention too that you should have 9 of these little points here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that's an easy way to count up and make sure that you did the correct amount of repeats there. All right, so here is row 23. And then we're going to do some edging, what I call edging setup rows. So in this project, all the squares are made, and some of them are made from the center out in the round, and some are made in worked in turned rows. They're made in different ways. But towards the end of each square, we do a border of that contrasting color. In my case, it's that off-white, and that is always worked in the round. So if you're working back and forth in turned rows, you wouldn't have specific stitches to stitch into here. So I do these little setup rows in the same color, so that way when you switch colors and then you work in the contrast color, it really looks neat and tidy. It makes a very big difference. Instead of just using the white as an edging and working in here, because that can look kind of uneven and a little messy because you're not necessarily putting 1 stitch into the same spot into the sides of those stitches, if that makes sense. All right, so we are going to be creating places with this same color to put our contrasting color. All right, so we've worked across row 23, and then we're going to work on the edging setup row 1. So we're going to rotate our piece 90 degrees, so that just means turn it like this. And then we're going to work along our row ends. We're going to use a stitch marker to divide this in half. So let's see. So I like to just do that by folding it, and then I find the center. There we go. And then we are going to work 10 slip stitches here and 10 slip stitches here. So we have a total of 20 slip stitches across. And when you do this, try not to make your slip stitches too tight. You don't want your piece to pull in, and you don't want it to ripple. So just be mindful of that. But we're just going to be making sure we get 10 stitches in before we get to our marker. If you're having a hard time distributing things evenly, you could further divide this with stitch markers here, and then do 5 slip stitches here, and 5 here, 5 here, and 5 here to help you distribute them a little bit easier. So there's 1, 2, 3, and I'm just putting my hook wherever it looks like a good spot. Try to avoid placing your hook in a large hole because that makes the hole even larger. So try to find a tighter space for your hook when you do these, when you stitch into those, into the ends of your rows. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're about at our halfway point between here and here, so that's good. And then we'll do 5 more before that stitch marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to remove our stitch marker and do the same thing. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then 5 more left. 1, 2, oops, that one got a little bit snagged. Here, I'm going to pull that out. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so we'll take a look at it, and it looks pretty even. I'm happy with that. So then we just fasten off. And maybe that seems weird because we're going to be doing another setup row, but sometimes, and this hopefully will answer a question that somebody had, like, why do we only do setup rows on certain sides, maybe not all the way around the whole thing? Because there's another square where I did this type of thing where I just had maybe, I think it was along 3 sides. I went here, here, and here, or something like that. Pretty sure that's what it was. The reason that I'm doing that is because I am trying to make all these squares be uniform and be the same dimensions as other stitch patterns, and it's really hard to try and get all your stitches to be exactly the same measurements. So sometimes I'm adding a border in some places but not others, but I do want to make sure that there is a place to stitch into that's already been prepped. So you're not going to be using a contrasting color and just working along a turned edge here like this spot right here. So for sure, all the edges will have a stitch worked into it, but we don't need to have we don't need to add another edging row across here because I don't want it to get too long, and it'll start to turn into a rectangle. So we're going to join our yarn over here. Oh, it looks like Debbie. Okay, so Debbie, if I were one to make a sweater, I would use rows 1 to 6 as the bottom border of the sweater, and maybe on the sleeves also. Sure. I hope I got the row numbers right. Yes, I know what you're saying. So you'd have like the first repeat of this kind of thing going along on the bottom. That would be cool. And then speaking of sweaters, Debbie says, maybe you could do a crochet along making a sweater. You know, Debbie, I've actually already been thinking about that. I'm kind of puzzling that over in my brain. To see if I can make that happen. But yeah, if you guys are interested in that, chime in and let me know. We'll kind of put our feelers out and see if more people would be interested in doing some kind of crochet along sweater situation. Okay, so let me back up. So this is where we just worked. That was our slip stitch row that we worked. And now we're going to be working right here, making another slip stitch row in the same way. So we're going to just divide this in half like this. And we are going to insert, so I already have a slip knot on my hook, or you could just insert your hook and pull up a loop, which is completely fine. You could do it either way. So we're going to just kind of join to our piece, and then we're going to do 20 slip stitches across. So 10 before here and 10 after the marker, okay? So, whoops, that's kind of a larger hole there. I don't want to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a little checkpoint. Looks like we're about halfway there. Maybe I'll make the next stitches just a little longer. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we'll remove our stitch marker and then do 5 more. 1, 2, 3, whoops, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's our last one. Okay, and then we can fasten off there too. All right, and then at this point, if you want to, you can go ahead and weave in your ends. I'm not going to do that right now. I will show weaving in ends at the end when we have a little bit, if we have a little bit extra time, which I think we will. All right, so the edging, so we've worked through the edging setup, row 1 and row 2, and now we are going to work on the edging. So I'm going to turn this back around. This is where, this was the first, what am I trying to say? This was the edging setup row that we first did, the first one. So this was the top of our work right here. So we're going to start, hold the square so the top edge is ready to be worked across. So that's here. So if you look at these, they're going to be branching upward like that. That's pointing kind of towards the top, okay? But actually, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. If you have it upside down, it won't make a difference. I just sort of tell people how to orient things so that it doesn't get confusing with the language. But if you started it upside down, it wouldn't even matter because we're just making a couple of rounds in a contrasting color, so it doesn't matter if it's upside down or not. All right, so we're going to pull up a loop of color F, which is my lighter contrasting color, in the first stitch. So that's right here. Pulling up a loop, and then we're going to chain 1 that doesn't count as a stitch. Then we're going to single crochet in the same stitch in each of the next 22 stitches across. So here's our first single crochet. I'm going to mark that so I don't get confused. And then we're going to do 22 more single crochets across the top. So that would be all the way across, and then we are going to rotate our piece. Because at this point, we're going to just start working in the round. Let's see, maybe I will stitch on top of, because this is so light, let me see if I can do this. Stitch on top of something a little darker here so you guys can see a little better. Okay, so we've almost reached our corner. Okay, that was the last. Let me count up my stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and one more would be 23 stitches across because we single crocheted into the same stitch and into the next 22 stitches. So, and now we're going to rotate our work, and then we are going to do, let's see, 2 single crochets into the next stitch, single crochet across until there's one more left of this side, and then 2 single crochets into the next stitch. So we're working underneath those slip stitches here. So 1 and 2, and then a single crochet into each of the next 18 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are kind of sitting on the top of your work, you know, so you're not, usually you're working like this, but you kind of have to slide your hook like along your work to get underneath those slip stitches that we added. Those were the edging setup row that we're working into right now. So you can see, because we did that edging setup row, these stitches look so neat and tidy. You would never be able to get them to look that perfect if you were just working into the edges of your turned rows. It's just not a possibility. Even if you were like a crochet genius, you still would not be able to get them to look that perfect without doing some sort of setup row or something there. All right, I think I've got one more. Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, I've done my 18, and now I've got my last one here, so I'm going to do 2 single crochets into that last one on that side from my setup row, and then we rotate again. All right, and then we're going to do 2 single crochets, and oh wait, no, that's not quite right. Let's see, 1 single crochet into each of the 23 stitches across. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So normally, if you are a more experienced crocheter, you would know that when you're working around the edges of a square, you almost always add extra stitches into those 2 stitches at the corner, okay, or at least 1 stitch at the corner, depending on how you're distributing your stitches. You almost always have to have extra stitches here so that your edge doesn't kind of cup. And right now it's cupping just a little bit, but the reason that I'm not adding those extra stitches there is because I want my stitch count to even out with all the other squares in the blanket. So I did talk about this a little bit on one of the previous squares that we had. I think it might have been the bobble cable square. I can't remember. But it is in this particular project, there are some areas where normally I would add some extra stitches, but because I'm trying to even out all the stitch counts between all the squares, which require different stitch repeats and things like that, there might be areas where there might be like a little bit of cupping that happens here, but on the next round it'll get evened out a little bit more, and then you just use some blocking to fix that later when you sew your pieces together, and I promise it'll look good. My blanket looks good, and this was how I made it. But however, having said that, if you're like, nah, I don't really trust you, Brenda, I just don't think that's gonna work for me, that's fine. You can add extra stitches in that corner to make it lie flat. And then when you stitch your squares to each other, when we do the blanket assembly later, then you can, I should have explained as I turned here that I did 2 stitches in the very first slip stitch, and now I'm doing 1 stitch in each of the next 18 stitches, and then 2 in the last slip stitch here, okay? So that's all in your pattern. I mean, you don't have to remember all those numbers or anything, but I'm just letting you know that I am increasing on the ends of these 2 setup rows, but not across these 2 edges. But yes, so back to what I was saying. If you don't really trust me, which is fine, you can add some extra stitches into the corners to make them lay flat. And then when you go to sew your pieces together, then just know that you're not going to be able to sew them together in a 1-to-1 ratio between your pieces. So you just have to lay them next to each other where they line up and sew them where they're touching, and don't worry about making sure that you're getting 1 stitch from one square and 1 stitch from the other square and 1 stitch from one square. So basically those are the 2 options. Either you make it, you add those extra stitches and then you don't worry about it when you're sewing it together, or you can follow what I've written in the pattern, and then you can sew them together in a 1-to-1 ratio. Except for there is 1 square in this blanket, which we'll get to later, which is just, I couldn't make it work out. So for that one, you're going to have to just butt it up next to the squares beside it and not worry about matching it up for 1-to-1. Okay, so we've reached, oops, I have to put 2 stitches into that very last stitch. 1, 2, and now we are going to do a slip stitch into the first stitch that we made, like that, and then we'll chain 1, and then we're going to continue with round 2 of the edging. Okay, so we're going to do a single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches and 2 into the next stitch, and we're going to repeat that 4 times all the way around. So what we're doing is we're increasing just once at each corner. So we're going to just start with single crochet here. I'm going to mark that stitch. And I am just about at the end of this lesson. So if you guys have any questions, definitely pipe up and ask me. Put your questions in the comments section so that I can see you need to answer something. There was one question from a while ago. Somebody had asked on the log cabin square if they could just continue with that and make a blanket out of log cabin pattern. And you can absolutely just keep going and going and going and you can make a huge log cabin square. However, they did mention they wanted to use up a lot of yarn scraps, and I just wanted to caution that as you make your blanket bigger and bigger, each section from the log cabin square is going to get longer and longer and require more and more of the same color of yarn to make it work out. So that's something to think about. If you just wanted to make a blanket with just the log cabin squares, maybe you could make a whole bunch of log cabin squares, like make it like in the style of this blanket where you have a whole bunch of different squares with a border and then you sew them all together. And that way you could use up all those little scraps of yarn, but you wouldn't have to worry about, once you get your log cabin square going for a long time, you're going to start having some very long rectangles in it that probably would look best if they were, each rectangle was a solid color, or it doesn't have to be a solid color, but like one color of yarn. Otherwise, you're going to start to kind of lose that I don't know, the visual of it being a log cabin square. And you know, maybe that would be cool too. Maybe it wouldn't really matter if you did that. All right. Looks like we don't have any more questions. So I'm just going to continue here. And I'm just doing one increase at each corner. There's my increase. And so by an increase, I mean I'm placing 2 stitches into 1 stitch. And then working my way around. And you can see it is cupping just a little here. It's curling up just a little. But with a little shot of steam like this, it will lay flat. I promise. It's laying flat in my blanket. But, you know, no harm in adding some extra stitches at the corner if you're like, this is driving me crazy. I can't do it this way. Because I get that. I understand. All right. Well, I think you guys get the picture here. So we're just going to be, you know, making our way around the whole square. And then when you get to your stitch marker at the end, you'll just do a slip stitch and fasten off. And I would recommend fastening off if you're going to be using yarn, if you're going to be using the sewing method and not crocheting your pieces together, which is what I did in mine. I actually stitched all my pieces together because I felt like I had a little more control over things and it laid nice and flat. If you're going to be doing that, then leave yourself a long tail, like at least long enough to sew across maybe one side or 2 sides. So on each of these squares, I left one long tail of the contrasting color, and then I wove in all the rest of the yarns that I had used in that square, and before moving on to the next. Now, everybody's got their own style. I just really do not. I'm not a huge fan of weaving in ends, so I made myself do it as I went for most of this blanket. Towards the end, I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I had a lot to weave in, and I was kind of sad by that. So think about that ahead of time, whether you want to weave in lots and lots of ends later, or if you want to do that as you go. You know, just a little note from someone who did that. All right. Looks like nobody had any other questions, but we will be back, you know, for the next square, for square number 4, in our next session. So you can, if you start working on this and you are needing a little extra help, I always bring my samples from the previous lessons with me so that I can do a little demo on those if needed. If anybody has questions about the older squares, definitely, you know, meet me at my next lesson and then ask me those questions then. So, all right, I hope that you guys are enjoying making your blankets. I'm so excited that so many of you seem to be working on your blankets and you're choosing all kinds of cool colors. And please post pictures in the project gallery. I would love to see them. So thank you so much for joining me. It's great to be here, and I love teaching these live events. So thank you. Until next time, bye.